Let's see. Well, welcome everyone. Glad you made it. We have um, a lot going on this week. Am I sharing? I need to share my screen. Sorry. Let me share my screen with everyone. And here we go. Okay, am I in the right week? We're in week 3, correct? And we're looking at our research project, the IRB form, and the informed consent. We actually started talking about beginning those last week, which was nice, because for some reason, the IRB form and the informed consent forms, they can be intimidating when you first do them. I know they intimidated me the first time I had to do them. So I wanted to make sure we had a lot of lead time to get through that initial shock and understand that there's not a lot to them. They've done all the work for us. That's kind of the key for these. We want to use their work. So the IRB form and the informed consent, it's important to use what we're given in the IRB packets because lawyers have gone through it and we know that it's vetted and accurate. So we just want to put our pieces of information in there. So that's kind of my update, and we're going to be looking at our methodological, say that 10 times fast, methodological analysis overview. We'll kind of jump into that at the end of this week and all of next week, because that one, that's how we're going to look, and we're going to shape our entire project and proposal with how we're going to do it and why it's going to be a valid project. So that's going to be some good conversations there as well. So with that said, what are some questions that you have starting? I always like to start with your needs first. So does anybody have anything? Does anybody want to share anything that they've learned or need some help on? I'm sorry, I heard somebody saying something, but I couldn't quite catch it. And let me see. For some reason, my chat is not coming up. I think somebody may have typed in the chat box too. Oh, okay. So anything, anybody? If not, I'll just jump into the content for this week.
Professor, I'm not sure I'm connected to the group. Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Oh, okay, I finally got in. I'm using my phone and my computer. Sorry about that, guys.
You were probably talking, wondering why nobody was answering. Huh?
Exactly.
Well, I'm glad you made it. Okay.
Thank you.
So did you have a question or a response to anything?
No, I was going to kind of wait to see what you had to say about the IRB and make sure I was doing that form correctly.
Okay. You know, I think the IRB, I've had several questions on that. So let's go ahead and jump into that because it's important. One of the questions that I had, which I thought was a great question because it means that people are thinking about plagiarism and similarity, is that when they turned in the IRB form, it had a 90-some% similarity rating, and it should, because we want to use what they're giving us. You don't want to make an IRB form that is your own work because that your form is not vetted by the lawyer, the institution, things like that. So you want that IRB form to be the one that we get from here. And let's just go ahead and bring it up.
Should we be quoting anything we put in that's going to be from somebody else, or?
No, so I just brought up the form. All I did was I went to the assignment and then I click IRB form for excluded research. I'm having trouble speaking today, so I apologize for that. None of this stuff should be changed. The only thing now, we just type in your name, type in the project title, either the question you're trying to answer or the hypothesis you're testing. If you're doing an experimental, you probably want to put a hypothesis in there. And participants, it's just going to be, this is a general view of participants. It's not, George Hanshaw will. It'll be who are going to be your participants. Like I did a study looking at martial artists and reaction time or response times to stimulus. And the participants were martial artists with a minimum of 2 years experience. And so you're just defining who that audience is, who you're going to pull from is the participants. You don't have to get specific into who that person is. And then the procedures for data collection. Is it a survey? Are you going to perform an experiment? How are you going to gather that data? Now remember, we're not actually collecting it, but we have to be prepared, but we have to have the process as if we would collect it. Because the first thing you do with any experiment or any study is have everything set up, because if we don't know how we're going to, or if we don't know the procedures for data collection, it could never be approved, so you could never get it. You have to know exactly what you're going to do in order to move forward in order to get approval from the IRB, because they're not going to approve anything if you don't have procedures. So procedures for data collection, participants will fill out, survey that was created by, if you got it somewhere on the internet, just put where you have it. If you're going to create it, just put created by researcher is what you want to put down there. And then, so if you're doing an experiment, let's say the gum chewing and memory or anything like that, participants will chew gum and then take a test, whatever that kind of test is, as long as we're not testing chewing gum and walking at the same time, we're going to be okay. But you just want to kind of, yeah. So we just want to describe it, how we're going to collect that data so we can get approval. Because if we can't describe what we're going to do, there's no way we could ever get approval. We'd end up being like the Stanford prison experiment, and we could do whatever we want. Yeah. And then your instrument, once again, that survey, test, is my instrument. Am I just going to interview people? Then it'll be an interview, things like that. Do we have to have any of this stuff down here? Nope. All this can be blank, because you're not going to have any people in it. So if you want and you have the Adobe stuff, you can put your name and sign it here if you like, and I'll sign it there, but it's not a have to, because we're not going to follow through with the data gathering. So this is everything we're doing in these 8 weeks is just getting to a point where we would be able to perform this if we're actually going to perform the experiment. So does that make sense? Okay. I'm feeling like somebody has a question out there. Anybody? Okay. So that is the complete IRB form that's the complete for excluded research. We're going to do another IRB form later, and it's going to be the same sort of process. Just a little bit more stuff to it, but it's going to be the same kind of thing that we do. So with that one, let's jump into, if the old back button is working. Whoops, where am I at? Okay, let's jump into informed consent form. And once again, on the informed consent form, don't worry about the originality check. If you're worried about the originality check, that's good. Always be concerned with that. But with this, you should have a high percentage of similarity. If you don't, that's when I worry, because it means you did something yourself with this form, when this form's already been vetted by legal and the institution and everything else. So a couple of, here's the IRB application. Here's our handbook. When we click the handbook, I'm just going to go down and we want to get to the good part, which is the informed consent, which is right here on page 21, documentation of informed consent. Oh, we need to go to the end. I'm sorry. Whoops. No, that's not. Let me just get to the end because the actual form's in the appendix, I believe. Okay, low risk classroom. It's coming, I promise. Informed consent form, E1. You do not want to change any of this. Because if you do, that means we're running the risk of not giving people enough information, because we have to have that. So you're not trying to reinvent any of that stuff. Where you do want to jump in is right here, purpose, the study of which is designed to, and then you're going to, in 3 to 5 sentences, state what the study is trying to do. So if we're looking at, let's say, gender and music preference, this study, which you're being asked to participate, is designed to identify if there are any correlations to gender and music preference or whatever it may be, gum chewing and memory, things like that. So you just want to be very upfront and plain. Put this in George language, as I like to say. Make it just straightforward language. Don't try to academic it, if you will. Don't try to say, well, this study is trying to see if a participant engaged in the process of chewing a rubbery substance will no, gum chewing and memory. Georgian, okay, because it's very easy to kind of overthink this stuff. So just kind of keep it to the point and simple. And then your procedure. So here's your procedure. I use bullet points when I do these. What do I mean by that? Participants given informed consent. Participant is given a test or given instructions on how the procedural instructions. Participant will take test without gum chewing, begin chewing, Wrigley spearmint gum, retake test, whatever the procedure is. Just make it point by point by point by point. You don't have to write a biography about the process. Just give it point, 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 point. Because the easier it is for people who are going to approve this to understand, the more likely you are to not get it kicked back. Now, this one is just going to me, so it's not it's not going for actual approval. But if you are going for actual approval, think from the perspective of simplicity and how can I get people to understand this. And the reason why I kind of highlight that point is because if you're doing the research, you know so much about whatever you're trying to research that everything seems simple. It seems straightforward when it's not, because people who are not immersed in whatever you're studying, they don't know what you're talking about. So you need to make it so they can understand it simply and easily. I say that because I've done it before, because I've kind of overcomplicated things and got them kicked back. And when other people looked at it, they said, this makes no sense. But when I look at it, I say, it makes perfect sense because I've been studying this for 2 years. No, it doesn't. Keep it simple, bullet points on how you're going to do it. Because it's really easy to get lost in the process. And then all this other stuff that we're scrolling through, guess what?
Leave it.
Leave it alone. Leave it alone. And then if anybody's going to be audio taped, you can click that or not click that. And then there's another one for surveys here as well. So you should have a high similarity index on this.
Okay.
Does that kind of make sense? So just copy and paste it. Yeah. And if you're doing a survey, here's the one for the survey right here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so just copy and paste.
Yeah, I think we were trying to make it more complicated.
It's easy to do that because it sounds like it's a big deal, right?
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah, I was very overwhelmed with this week's assignments. I was seeing how am I going to get this done, but this looks way easier now that you explained it.
Yeah, right. Because when you first look at it, it's like, oh my goodness, what is this? Why am I here? What's going on? Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely understand that. So that's all it is. You do not want to change up what we call the boilerplate stuff. You want to add your information and move on. But you're not going to be deleting the boilerplate, because if you do, then you're putting yourself at risk, you're putting the institution at risk, and the IRB people will not approve what you're doing if you're putting yourself, the participants, or the organization at risk. It simply wouldn't be approved. And that's kind of the perspective that I'm going to look at these when I give you the feedback. Was it simple enough for me to understand well what you're going to do? So think of, when you do this, I don't know how this is going to sound, but think of me as being a third grader. Explain it to me like I'm in the third grade. Because if you can explain it simply, that means you really know what you're doing, and you can get me to understand it. So that's kind of what you want to do. So I didn't want to say that so it sounded degrading or anything, but that's what you want to do.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Stay away from the academic ease and just make it simple as possible.
I have one question.
Okay.
For the survey that you just showed, is it only that one side, or is it all the questions that is underneath?
Go all the way to, you see where it says student assessment form E3?
Yes.
We're not going to do any of that because that's for ages 12 to 17.
Oh, okay. So it's only that one side that you just on page.
So right here. So you're going to want to put an area where you could sign it or anything else. You don't have to. Just give it to me electronically. But that's all you need for your informed consent.
Okay, thank you. That makes it easy.
Yeah, absolutely. Because one of the key is that the voluntary status right there. Mm-hmm. They need to know, because remember last week we looked at Stanford Prison Experiment, and it was voluntary, but they were kind of coerced to stay in the program. They weren't forced, but there was some influence being pushed against them. So that's what we want to stay away from. And that's kind of why that statement's there, because of things like the Stanford Prison Experiment. That's the purpose for that voluntary status right there.
Okay, now it's clear. Thank you.
Okay, so the only thing you care about is right there, and possible risks. Oh, and I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Mine's on the next form.
Oh, I was going to say on possible risks, for the survey one, you don't have to put anything in there. It's already there. All you have to worry about is purpose. That's all I wanted to say. Or the survey. If you're collecting data with a survey, that's all you have to do. Put in your purpose. Okay, go ahead.
My question is about the E3. I chose the color, paper, and testing. So I thought I was kind of targeting high school age students. And I did have a hard time finding a lot of research based on high school students. I'm got to change it to adults.
Yeah, because, and the reason why I say no is because there is a whole other list of stuff you have to do if they're not adults. We don't want to, we don't want to get into all of that stuff. That could be a class within itself.
Okay.
Yeah, because if you're working with anyone under the age of 18, you have to have informed consent for the parents, informed consent for the people. You have to do other things to make sure that that the people between 12 and 17 are capable of making decisions and understanding. So it gets into a whole lot of different areas that we're really not going to cover in our class. We want to just stick with a basic group, which is over 18.
Okay.
So thank you for
Then
bringing.
I'll have to reword my research then.
Okay. Now for the your research purpose for any of the material that you found or articles, you can use any of that if it's for people under 18, but you're not going to be prepping this like it is for people under 18. Does that make sense?
So kind of use it as a lead up to, you know, based on previous research at previous ages.
Yeah.
And now we see at this age. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for doing that.
You're welcome. So any questions on the informed consent or IRB form? And there's no need to do anything by mail. I don't know why that's still there. That shouldn't. At one point in this class, we actually did collect the data. So it was a big deal to make sure we had original signatures, but we're not doing that anymore. Okay, so that's it. So we have like 10 minutes. Shall we jump into some of our content for the week with our discussion? Let's talk about statistics and pop culture. I'm jumping in on the conversation today as well. I gave it a couple days to kind of ruminate, if you will. So what are some thoughts about statistics and pop culture? What does pop culture do to our statistics these days?
Distorts it.
How so?
Well, I was reading an interesting article on graphs and the way a graph could be printed or viewed on media and how it could skew the results of the graph and the way it looks, making it look like a larger population than it really is.
Yes. And I'm going to give you a horrible story about that against myself. It was when I was working for Lockheed Martin and Skunk Works. We were giving a presentation and we were looking at some of the graphs and we wanted to highlight a few of the areas. So myself and a couple other people, we were figuring out ways to highlight it better. And when somebody else came in from the outside he was in our department, but he wasn't part of the group that was putting it all together, he immediately noticed that we were distorting the graphs. By the way we were sizing the graphs, doing different things, we were actually distorting the information that we were trying to project to other people. That wasn't our intent. Our intent was just to make it very obvious so we could highlight it. We didn't want to mislead anybody, but that's what we would have ended up doing if this other person didn't come in and say, hey, wait a minute, they all need to be the same scale. We need to have this, we need to have that. And you can do things like that very honestly, because our intent wasn't to mislead anybody, but we would have. So I thought that was kind of interesting from the point that you brought up. So what are some other thoughts about statistics and today our pop culture, media, stuff like that?
I had one side from USA Today, and it was very interesting, and I have it on my post. They have a site actually where they have corrections from whatever article they had before. So it's like, okay, you give out data and then you go back and correct. So you should make your research before you even put it on. So that was very funny for me.
Yeah, and that kind of circles back. Wasn't our week one ethics stuff to do with ethics? Week one or week two? I'm sorry, I forget which week, but yeah, that circles right back around to ethics, right there.
Yeah.
One thing that happens now with, especially with the news cycles, 24 hours. Social media has a news cycle, 24 hours. And the first one to put something out gets all the hits, gets all the follow the money, gets all the money, right? So there's a mad race to be the first to put things out. And when that happens, accuracy, legitimacy, things like that can be compromised quickly. So that research that you're talking about quite often doesn't get done because they're in a race to get it out. Because
Right.
that, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's
Another
all.
thing,
Go ahead.
go ahead. Go ahead, finish your thought.
I'm sorry. Also with statistics, my class before I did this class was statistics. And so even to see when they do the graph, how they do it, that it looks so alarming. I mean, the y-axis is not right. It's just like, okay, bring it to 0 and show us what you really have, and don't put it up to where you think now we have a real weather change, or we have the collection from the voters and stuff like that is so unreal. And not to talk bad about them, but Fox News have the most incorrect data on their thing. That is what I experienced.
Wow. Okay, Deborah, did you have something to contribute to that?
One of the things that I found interesting is I always thought, they told us we did fact finding, and therefore this is the correct information. Well, in my research, I found out fact finding was just verifying that some other agency had reported that data already, not that it meant going to the source to verify the data.
So that brings us to a point about our research when you're doing your looking for your different sources. It's very important to use the original source, because you're right. We don't want those secondary sources. We want the original source. That's key to make your research stronger. If you're using secondary sources, generally, even in psychology where everything's peer reviewed, a lot of times secondary sources are incorrect. So when you read a source and go back to the source they found, things are going to be incorrect. Now, are they doing it on purpose? Of course not. But if you continue with that piece of data, guess what just happened? You continued the incorrectness. Because always remember, what was it? Mark Twain. There's lies, damn lies, and statistics. So always keep that in mind, because we can make things look however we choose. So as a researcher and professional, we need to what I like to say is detach from it. So we have to not really care what the results are. We have to be more concerned with the results being right, if you will, not how we represent them. We need to find the results and detach from, this is my study, this is what I wanted to find. I should have been able to find this. So let me skew things like this. No, you have to be able to detach, and you get whatever the results are, and then start making assumptions and drawing conclusions from the data that you get. Don't try to have an agenda to move it in any certain way. All right, any other thoughts about pop culture and statistics these days? Has anybody, I'm going to throw a question out there, so we're coming on to our time, but the question is, how often do you see people throwing out statistics? How often do you personally wonder where they got it from, or check them? Or do we just take, when somebody throws out a bunch of numbers, do we just take that as, for real, if you will, for lack of a better term?
I think if we don't aware on that is a lot of fake data out there, we just go with the flow, and some people just put their mouse on it. But honestly, I live by I trust God, and everybody else will be investigated. So I will investigate what is going on.
Okay, I like it. Michael, how about yourself, sir?
No, thank you. That's all I have to say.
Okay. So when I worked with Lockheed, we one of our projects was a U-2, it was a spy plane, and the patch that the pilots and mechanics wore, it said, "In God we trust, all others we monitor."
That's what I said.
Yeah, that's why I brought it up. I was like, that's perfect. That's a YouTube slogan. All right.
Okay.
So, all right. So I think we hit it. Any questions before we call time? No?
I just want to thank you for doing this. It makes such a big difference to be able to connect with the professor and have an opportunity to see, hear, and ask questions. So
Yeah, I
even though I
appreciate it.
couldn't get on this week.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. You're welcome. I appreciate you all showing up. It's good. I enjoy it. So thank you.
Thank
And,
you.
we'll keep so it'll be every Wednesday at noon. I know last night I was a little bit late putting the link up there. Like, oh no, I wonder if anybody's gonna see this before it's time.
Yeah.
So every Wednesday at noon if you have any questions.
Oh, and thank you for your story that you posted, how you went through grade school. That was amazing. Thank you.
Mhm.
Oh, I'm glad you like it. Thank you. Yeah, that was crazy. Crazy times. But those crazy times are the best. You
Yeah.
know, you look back up and warms your heart. So yeah, I like to share stuff like that. So thank you for that.
Mhm.
Yeah, it helped me, but I have to tell you, it's funny. I glanced at it and I thought, why is he telling us about grade school?
Oh, did I put grade school on there?
No, you didn't. So I just glanced at it and thought, grade school?
So, the 6th grade was the longest 3 years of my life. So just leave me alone.
I love it.
All right. Well, everybody have a fantastic afternoon. And we'll see you on the discussion boards. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.